Unless you're indoctrinated at some point early on, it's kind of like smoking. You tend not to pick it up later in life. I mean, there are exceptions to that.
As a child, you were an atheist?
Well, I just was not. Atheism has no content. I mean, being an atheist is like being a non-astrologer. You know, no one gets taught to be a non-astrologer. You just don't get convinced by astrology. So
what were your parents?
They were secular. I mean, God was just not talked about in the house.
Oh, lucky you. And in your book, End of Faith, which I love, you don't really use that word.
Yeah, yeah.
So what would you say to people who say, because I hear this all the time, then what do you believe?
Well, I mean, as you say, the irony is I never used the word atheist in this book, which actually touched off this movement's so-called new atheism.
Your book did?
Yeah.
I thought it was me.
Well, we collaborated.
I'm kidding.
I'm sure I stole some of your lines. But the point is that atheism is not a belief system. It is the rejection of a certain style of dogma, and it's the dogmas of religion. And so every Christian is an atheist with respect to Islam. They're not convinced by the claim that the Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe. They're not losing any sleep over whether or not to convert to Islam. And an atheist is just someone who goes one God further and just does not accept any of these unsupported claims.
And what do you say to people who say to people like us, you're just being mean? You know, because I hear this all the time, you know, religion, it gives comfort to people. Why don't you let them have that? What is the answer to that, and to convince people that, you know, that comfort comes at a price? Right,
right. Well, there's this idea that religious beliefs can be kept separate, and they don't need to intrude into public policy, into politics, into science. And it's just not true. Insofar as somebody actually believes something, it inevitably shows up in the world. I mean, the beliefs are the means to organize behavior and emotion. And so presidents who really believe that the book of Revelation is a guide to the end times could very well lead us into wars that conform to those bogus blueprints. And we have a Muslim world that is lit up with notions of martyrdom and jihad. And these are beliefs, explicit beliefs about how you get into paradise and what it's worth living for and dying for.
But I can almost hear people out there saying, but that's not me. I'm a religious person, but I don't believe like George Bush did. I mean, there's a story in the press, I'm sure you've seen this recently, that George Bush told Jacques Chirac in 2003 that he was asking his help to go into Iraq because he said the biblical demons named Gog and Magog.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know about these demons, but
well, nobody does, as it turns out.
Well, they're in the book of Ezekiel, and they're in the book of Revelations. But he said they were afoot in the Middle East. You know, what people say, well, that's not me. That's the extremist.
Right. Well, it's not extreme. I mean, the issue there is that that should be horrifying to us, the Gog and Magog story, that those thoughts were rattling around Bush's head. But it should be horrifying but not surprising, because the evangelicals have been telling us for a century what they believe. 70% of evangelicals think that the Bible is a literal word of the creator of the universe and that all of those prophecies are valid.
Yes.
And about 40% of Americans generally believe this. So it's not just a few people believing these things. 80% of Americans think that Jesus literally rose from the dead, will be returning to earth to raise the dead. Francis Collins, who's like the poster boy for sophisticated faith now. I mean, he's not a fundamentalist. He's a scientist who's now running the NIH. He believes
this. This is Obama's appointment.
Yes.
Let's set the table for people who don't know this story. I know who he is.
Yeah.
Francis Collins. He is a brilliant scientist. You can't deny that. He mapped the human genome.
Yeah. Right? Well, he is often credited as a brilliant administrator, and he collaborated with 2,500 scientists who, in part, map the human genome. I mean, the problem is that you can be a working scientist and still believe unsupportable religious bullshit because nobody challenges it. I mean, that's.
No, I know and Obama has appointed him to be the head of the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health.
Right.
Now, for the person who says, well, so what? He obviously is a scientist who can work in the lab and do scientific work and separate that from his beliefs about the space god Carpenter.
Yeah, but you can't actually separate these things, because if you believe that for instance, as he does, that morality could not possibly have emerged out of evolution, that it can't really have its basis in the brain, but rather had to be inserted by the hand of God at some point when we diverged from apes. I mean, he's written this, he believes this. Then, as someone funding neuroscience research, there's no reason to look for morality in biology, and no reason to fund a study that would explain its emergence out of the brain, which most serious scientists studying morality attempt to do. Your beliefs can't be kept. We have one sphere of reality that we try to represent in our thoughts. And this is why we've founded this foundation called the Reason Project, because we think it's a war of ideas that has to be prosecuted from many levels. You know, your level, I mean, you're on the advisory board, so someone like yourself from the entertainment business, but also scientists like Steven Weinberg and Craig Venter, to novelists like Ian McEwan and Salman Rushdie. We have to come at this from many sides all at once, because this is bigger than atheism. And reason is bigger than atheism. We have a problem of good ideas versus bad ideas. And the real double standard that we're suffering from is that religious bad ideas can't be criticized with any energy.
So answer me the fundamental question that I posed at the beginning of Religulous, which is, how can people like Francis Collins, but he's certainly not the only one.
No.
We're taping a show after this with Bill Moyers. I mean, I have unending respect for Bill Moyers as a brilliant man. He's also a Baptist minister. Jimmy Carter, you know, pretty bright. How do we reconcile someone who is so intelligent but who believes things which you and I think are incredibly childish and nonsensical? Do we say that it's a neurological disorder do they have, or do we just say, I'm sorry, however brighter you are in the other field, you're a rube?
Yeah. No, it's a social disorder. It's a conversational disorder. It's the fact that we can't apply enough pressure to these ideas, and it's taboo to do so. And there's this fact that there is a core of truth to religion that we should be interested in. There's the fact that people do have transformative experiences. You know, if Jesus really was who they said he was, or Buddha likewise, it's possible, perhaps, to be the Tiger Woods of compassion. You know, it's possible to really to be someone who has transformed himself, and we should be interested in that, and we should want to actualize that and understand it scientifically. But the problem is that it's so mired in religious mumbo jumbo and superstition and taboo, and religion has seemed to be the only game in town in talking about that possibility, and we have to overcome that.
And we will, with your help. Thank you very much, Sam. We'll talk with them soon and more. Sam Harris, everybody. Thank you, Sam. Let's meet our panel. All Africans. I know our president is a loud tribesman. Why are we all African?
You don't have to go back very far, only about 100,000 years, and all our ancestors lived in Africa, were African, and walked out of Africa not that long ago. So we are African. Actually, we're African apes. We're all African apes, and somehow brings us all together, don't you think?
We're apes with a shave.
Yeah, exactly right, yes.
But Christine O'Donnell, who I showed the clip of last week, said that she does not believe in evolution, believes it's a myth, because she said, how come we don't see apes evolving now? Why don't you go to the zoo and see the monkey evolving, you know, before our eyes? I know this is what they call a softball here in America, but for those who don't... You know.
That is spectacularly stupid, and... It's not...
I love the British, the way they can get away with it.
It's not just that it suggests that she thinks that monkeys turn into humans overnight, but it's also the fact that monkeys are very good doing what they do. They live up trees, and it's a very good thing to be a monkey if you're up a tree. You might as well say, why aren't humans turning into monkeys? Because we have a common ancestor with monkeys, which lived about 20 million years ago, and we've both been evolving ever since. That's as simple as that.
And what about throwing the poop?
Well, I've known that to happen, if not in real humans, at least in human cartoons.
But that does seem to suggest that the monkeys are more primitive, more interested.
Well, primitive means primitive means more like ancestor. So if we looked at the common ancestor of humans and it's up there, and then we come down. That common ancestor would have looked much more like a monkey than it looks like a human. So we probably would have called it a monkey, yes.
And the people who say evolution, you know, not real because we can't see it, this kind of stuff, in your book, which is marvelous, interesting, even to the layman, which is what I am, the layman, if I could appreciate it, anyone can, because I'm not a science person. You talk about, for example, the fact that lizards, even in our lifetime, were moved to an island, right, where they never were before, and we saw it in just a matter of decades.
That's right. I mean, most of evolution happened before we were born and took much too long for us to see, but there are just a few examples, and these lizards is one. They were moved from one island in the Mediterranean to another, and within a couple of decades, they had evolved a completely new diet, and that had changed their jaws, even changed their stomachs, and they now got stomach valves. In just a couple of decades, just think what could be achieved in 1 million years, 100 million years.
So when people say the Bible is real, what they're really saying is that ancient people somehow have more knowledge of it, somehow more wiser. That's silly, right? Because wisdom develops on the shoulders of other people. I mean, there could be no Einstein without Newton. There could be no, right?
Yeah. And we're not even talking about the ancient Greeks, and we're talking about a tribe of wandering Middle Eastern herdsmen. I mean, why would they have any wisdom about the origin of the world or the origin of anything else? That particular myth is the myth that just by sheer chance, the Judeo-Christian myth, happens to have come to our civilization. There are thousands of myths in the world. None of them are any better than any of the others. Some of them are a lot more poetic than that one. But that's all you can say.
And you have a campaign, I know that I saw you speak on YouTube very eloquently about this OUT campaign.
Oh, the OUT campaign. Well, it's even written on the T-shirt, which, by the way, you can get from richarddawkins.net. And you also look up...
You're not so evolved that you're above applause.
I know. Sorry about that. And the OUT campaign is there too. The OUT campaign, it's partly... Sorry about that. And the OUT campaign is there too. The OUT campaign, it's partly come out as an atheist. Don't be afraid to come out. It's not... but we're not in the business of outing people. People may out themselves, and all we do is encourage them. Keep religion out of schools, keep religion out of politics.
I want to hear your answer to the people, because I saw you speak about this, who say, well, you know, atheists are responsible for really all the horrible things that have happened in the last century, because Hitler and Stalin and Mao were all atheists, and look what they did.
Hitler was a Roman Catholic, and even if he wasn't, which he was, even if he wasn't, his soldiers, his foot soldiers, those who actually did the horrible things, were either Catholic or Lutheran, and they had been schooled for centuries to hate Jews. Both Catholics and Lutherans had been trained to believe that Jews were responsible for killing Jesus. So Hitler had a ripe field to plow there in the Christian heritage of Germany.
But could I add something to that? Because I've thought about this, I've been confronted this with myself many times, which is that I think people get hung up on the word religion. Hitlerism, Stalinism, Maoism were state religions.
They were religions, of course.
And Hirohito in Japan was a godlike figure.
Yeah.
The real crux of it is that any time that people give up on logic and put their faith in someone, Kim Jong-il, in North Korea, the mythology around him. They said that the first time he played golf, he had 11 holes in one.
Yes, right, yes.
That's religion.
That's right. And the point is that there is no logical pathway that would lead you from atheism to do those terrible things.
Right.
There is a logical pathway that would lead to that either from a Christian religion or something like that, or from one of these state religions like Nazism, like Stalinism, and so on. You really can justify doing those awful things if you believe something as strongly as religious people do. But nobody's going to go and kill for the sake of atheism. Why on earth would you?
Right. Yeah. In France this week, they passed a law that you cannot wear the burqa. Now, I know you feel, as I do, it doesn't really matter what you wear, but just speak a little about what goes on in the schools of...
Right. I mean, I think, as you imply, there are much worse things than the clothes you wear. A couple of months ago, I visited a British Islamic school, one of the best in the country, and the headmaster was a leading a leading Muslim in Britain, and I spoke to about 6 of the girls. Only the girls and boys are kept strictly separate, of course. And I learned that every single pupil in that school did not believe in evolution, and the pupils that I spoke to quite clearly think that the Quran is a superior source of scientific information than evidence. And they told me, for example, that salt water and fresh water don't mix. The reason? Because it says that in the Quran. Now, alas, I lacked the presence of mind to turn to the teacher sitting next to me and say, will you please, at the very next science lesson, get some salt water, get some fresh water, and mix them and see what happens? But,
well,
and my guess is that even if she did that, and sure enough they would mix, they still would believe the Quran, because the Quran takes precedence over fact, evidence.
Whether water is salt or fresh, shit floats. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Please stay around for overtime. Richard Dawkins, everybody, and now we will meet our panel. Thank
you. Ask yourselves, what is wrong with spending eternity in hell? Well, I'm told it's rather hot there, for one. Dr. Craig is not offering an alternative view of morality. Okay, the whole point of Christianity, or so it is imagined, is to safeguard the eternal well-being of human souls. Now, happily, there's absolutely no evidence that the Christian hell exists. Okay, and I think we should look at the consequences of believing in this framework, this theistic framework, in this world, and what these moral underpinnings actually would be. All right. 9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Okay, picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. Okay, it's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Okay, but according to Dr. Craig, this is all part of God's plan. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil. And worse than that, on Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation. Okay, there are 1.2 billion people in India at this moment. Most of them are Hindus, most of them therefore polytheists. Okay, in Dr. Craig's universe, no matter how good these people are, they are doomed. If you are praying to the monkey god Hanuman, you are doomed. Okay. You will be tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No. It just says so in Mark 9 and Matthew 13 and Revelation 14. Okay. Perhaps you'll remember from the Lord of the Rings, it says when the elves die, they go to Valinor, but they can be reborn in Middle-earth. I say that just as a point of comparison. Okay. So God created the cultural isolation of the Hindus. Okay. He engineered the circumstance of their deaths in ignorance of revelation. And then he created the penalty for this ignorance, which is an eternity of conscious torment in fire. Okay, on the other hand, on Dr. Craig's account, your run-of-the-mill serial killer in America, okay, who spent his life raping and torturing children, need only come to God, come to Jesus on death row, and after a final meal of fried chicken, he's going to spend an eternity in heaven after death. Okay? One thing should be crystal clear to you. This vision of life has absolutely nothing to do with moral accountability. Okay, and please notice the double standard that people like Dr. Craig use to exonerate God from all this evil. Okay, we're told that God is loving and kind and just and intrinsically good. But when someone like myself points out the rather obvious and compelling evidence that God is cruel and unjust because he visits suffering on innocent people of a scope and scale that would embarrass the most ambitious psychopath, okay, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, who can understand God's will? Okay, and yet this is precisely, this merely human understanding of God's will is precisely what believers use to establish his goodness in the first place. You know, something good happens to a Christian. He feels some bliss while praying, say, or he sees some positive change in his life, and we're told that God is good. Okay, but when children by the tens of thousands are torn from their parents' arms and drowned, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, this is how you play tennis without the net. Okay, and I want to suggest to you that it is not only tiresome when otherwise intelligent people speak this way, it is morally reprehensible. Okay, this kind of faith is really the perfection of narcissism. I mean, God loves me, don't you know? He cured me of my eczema. He makes me feel so good while singing in church. And just when we had given up hope, he found a banker who was willing to reduce my mother's mortgage. Okay. Given all that this God of yours does not accomplish in the lives of others, given the misery that's being imposed on some helpless child at this instant, this kind of faith is obscene. Okay. To think in this way is to fail to reason honestly or to care sufficiently about the suffering of other human beings. And if God is good and loving and just and kind, and he wanted to guide us morally with a book, why give us a book that supports slavery? Why give us a book that admonishes us to kill people for imaginary crimes like witchcraft? Now, of course, there's a way of not taking these questions to heart. Okay, according to Dr. Craig's divine command theory, God is not bound by moral duties. God doesn't have to be good. Whatever he commands is good. So when he commands that the Israelites to slaughter the Amalekites, that behavior becomes intrinsically good because he commanded it. Okay, well, here we're being offered, I'm glad he raised the issue of psychopathy, we're being offered a psychopathic and psychotic moral attitude. It's psychotic because this is completely delusional. There's no reason to believe that we live in a universe ruled by an invisible monster, Yahweh. But it is psychopathic because this is a total detachment from the well-being of human beings. This so easily rationalizes the slaughter of children. Okay, just think about the Muslims at this moment who are blowing themselves up, okay, convinced that they are agents of God's will. There is absolutely nothing that Dr. Craig can say against their behavior in moral terms, apart from his own faith-based claim that they're praying to the wrong God. Okay, if they had the right God, what they were doing would be good on divine command theory. Now, I'm obviously not saying that Dr. Craig or all religious people are psychopaths and psychotics, but this, to me, is the true horror of religion. Okay, it allows perfectly decent and sane people to believe by the billions what only lunatics could believe on their own. Okay, if you wake up tomorrow morning thinking that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, okay, you have lost your mind. Okay? But if you think more or less the same thing about a cracker and the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic. And I'm not the first person to notice that it's a very strange sort of loving God who would make salvation depend on believing in him on bad evidence. Okay, I mean, if you lived 2,000 years ago, there was evidence galore. I mean, he was just performing miracles. But apparently he got tired of being so helpful. Okay, and so now we all inherit this very heavy burden of the doctrine's implausibility. And the effort to square it with what we now know about the cosmos and what we know about the all-too-human origins of Scripture becomes more and more difficult. And it's not just the generic God that Dr. Craig is recommending. It is God the Father and Jesus the Son. Okay, Christianity, on Dr. Craig's account, is the true moral wealth of the world. Well, I hate to break it to you here at Notre Dame, but Christianity is a cult of human sacrifice. Okay, Christianity is not a religion that repudiates human sacrifice. It is a religion that celebrates a single human sacrifice as though it were effective. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. John 3:16. Okay, the idea is that Jesus suffered the crucifixion so that none need suffer hell, except those billions in India and billions like them throughout history. Okay, this is astride. This doctrine is astride a contemptible history of scientific ignorance and religious barbarism. We come from people who used to bury children under the foundations of new buildings as offerings to their imaginary gods. I mean, just think about that. In vast numbers of societies, people would bury children in post holes, people like ourselves thinking that this would prevent an invisible being from knocking down their buildings. Okay. These are the sorts of people who wrote the Bible. Okay. If there is a less moral framework than the one Dr. Craig is proposing, I haven't heard of it.
Does God exist? Is religion a force for good or evil? Can religion and science go hand in hand? To find some answers, I've come to Oxford, home to the oldest university in the English-speaking world and the place where I studied as an undergraduate. One of the jewels in the city's crown is the Oxford Union, the debating chamber that's witnessed such legendary orators as Winston Churchill, Benazir Bhutto, and of course, Kermit the Frog. I've come back to the Union today to sit down with the world's most famous atheist, Professor Richard Dawkins, to put faith on trial and to ask, is religion evil? Muslims riot in protest against a truly awful film demonising Islam. Dozens are killed.
The Quran, if found guilty, can be burned.
A Christian pastor in Florida tries to burn a copy of the Quran and ignites global pandemonium. Even Buddhists are at it, attacking the Muslim minority Rohingyas in Western Burma. And of course, the conflicts plaguing the modern Middle East are often blamed on ancient hatreds between the children of Abraham. Remember 9/11? Was this religiously inspired terrorism? Thousands died. Yet here's the thing. Societies without faith haven't fared much better. Communism banned all religions, as Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong systematically slaughtered millions of their own countrymen. Is science any better? Since Galileo and Darwin, scientists have sought to stamp out ignorance and unravel the mysteries of the universe. But science has also poisoned the environment, unleashed killing on an industrial scale, and now threatens our entire planet. My guest today, however, stands firmly on the side of science and has provoked controversy with his attacks on religion. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Richard Dawkins. One of the most prolific thinkers of his generation, he shot to fame in the 1970s with his research into genetics, and his book, The Selfish Gene, transformed evolutionary biology. His most famous work, The God Delusion, sold millions of copies, and has been translated into more than 30 languages.
Richard, thanks so much for joining us here on Al Jazeera. Before we go any further, I just want to check something. Are you an atheist?
For all practical purposes, yes. Nobody can actually say for certain that anything doesn't exist. But I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an a-leprechaunist and an a-fairyist and an a-pink unicornist.
So you're not 100% sure God doesn't exist, but you're sure enough to make it practically...
I'm as sure as you are sure that fairies and leprechauns don't exist.
And do you see an equivalence between the idea of God and the idea of a fairy and a leprechaun?
The evidence for both is equally poor.
You say, in The God Delusion, one of my favourite sentences that jumps out of the page, that the God of the Old Testament is a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capricious, malevolent bully. As a piece of rhetoric, superb. But do you really believe that?
Congratulations on getting megalomaniacal right, by the way. Most people fumble on that. Yes, if you've actually read the Old Testament, I think you would have to agree. It's hideous. It's an the God of the Old Testament who is a monster.
But also the God of the Quran, the New Testament, the Hindu scripture?
Well, the God of the Quran, I don't know so much about. The God of the New Testament is widely advertised as being a bit more gentle. And certainly, on the whole, he is. There are things about the New Testament that I find, in a way, almost more objectionable than the Old Testament. But the sheer horror of the character, I said he was the most unpleasant character in all fiction, because I regard it as fiction, of course. And yes, he is. I mean, he's jealous, he's vindictive, he's callous, he's cruel.
And yet this is a God that is worshipped by, loved by, adored by, followed by millions, billions of people.
I hope not. I hope that the God that is adored by millions of people is a grown-up kind of God who is no longer... I hope that most people who... the kind of people I would like to know who worship and admire him regard those stories as not literally true. Now, there are some who do regard them as literally true, and I suspect they either haven't read the Old Testament or they're not the kind of people I would wish to know, because you do not want to worship a character like that. By all means, worship some kind of great spirit of the universe, some kind of creative intelligence who created the universe, but don't worship this vile, vindictive monster of the Old Testament.
Why throw around these sweeping statements about religion? Not the God of the Old Testament, but religion itself being evil. I mean, do you believe religion is evil?
No.
But you say plenty of times in this book that religion is evil. You said in a speech famously that I think a case can be made that faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate.
I do think that, yes. Because what I'm talking about there is faith, where faith means belief in something without evidence. Because if you believe something without evidence, then that justifies anything. You're no longer vulnerable to somebody coming back at you and saying, hang on a minute, let me argue the case. If you believe it without evidence, which is what faith is, then you don't argue the case. You say, no, I'm not arguing that case. This is my faith. It's mine. It's private. I don't dissent from it. I don't retreat from it. You're just going to have to accept it. Now, that is evil.
And yet you spend so much of your time debating people of faith. So clearly people of faith are interested in having discussions. They're not just all blind believers insisting on their way of...
Well, nobody said anything about all of them. I mean, the vast majority of religious people are perfectly good, nice people, as you are. There's no suggestion I've ever made that all religious people are evil. Of course not. There is a logical progression that goes from believing in faith, having faith that your God tells you to do something, and doing terrible deeds, like suicide bombing, like flying planes into skyscrapers. The vast majority of people of faith don't do such terrible things. But those people who do terrible things do it believing that they are righteous and good and they think that they're doing the will of their God. So they're not evil people, they're actually good people by their own lights. They believe they're doing good things, and that's why religion is evil, because it can make you do evil things believing that they are good.
Do you really believe that people who go out and carry out suicide bombings, it is faith? Religion is to blame, not geopolitics, not the world, not their lives, not what's going on around us. It's religion, plain and simple.
Not always, it's not in the case of the Tamil Tigers, for example, but I think in a great majority of cases it is, and I think it certainly makes it a hell of a lot easier. The evidence is plain that in many Islamic suicide bombers, you talk to them, those who fail, you talk to them afterwards, they've got paradise on the brain. They're desperate to go to a martyr's heaven. And that's what they think about.
Professor Robert Pape of the University of Chicago studied every known case of suicide terrorism, 315 cases. And he came to the conclusion that there's, quote, little connection between suicide terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism or any of the world's religions. The taproot of suicide terrorism, he says, is nationalism. It's about land, it's about power, it's about politics. It's not about faith. Faith is just a cover. What do you know that he doesn't know?
Well, I've seen other evidence. There are different people say different things. I've seen plenty of testimonies of suicide bombers who have said precisely that they do it because they want a martyr's paradise.
Do you include the 7/7 bombers in that case as well?
Yes, I believe so.
Have you watched their suicide videos?
I'm not sure that I have, no.
They talk about Afghanistan, they talk about Iraq, they talk about crusades, they talk about war between the West and the Muslim world, they talk about invading armies. I mean, there's a lot of real world stuff in there. I'm not saying, of course not, that faith doesn't play a role, but I'm just interested in this idea that you think faith is the issue. You said in a very famous column you wrote 4 days after 9/11 that this came from religion.
There are enormously good reasons for people to take political action, and this we see in Northern Ireland, we see it in Afghanistan, we see it in Sri Lanka, where the Tamil Tigers operated. So yes, there are political reasons, but the promise of a martyr's heaven, which is, you cannot deny that this is part of Islamic doctrine. Martyrs go straight to paradise.
Yes, but not terrorists, not murderers, not criminals.
Well, they believe that because they're told it by their imams.
But then what about the majority of the world's Muslim clerics and ulama who came out and condemned 9/11 straight
Well, I'm
afterwards?
delighted they did, but they were pretty quiet about it.
What about the argument that says human beings are prone to violence, they're prone to carrying out crimes against their fellow man? You can blame religion, you can blame politics, you can blame economics, lots of factors, lots of excuses. What I don't get is, why do you only focus on religion? For fairness, why don't you also isolate the other factors?
There are lots of other factors, and I'm quite happy to say that, yes. There are lots of, I mean, if you look at the wars of history, some of them have been about religion, plenty of them have not been about religion. I never said religion is the sole cause of wars and violence.
You may not have said that, but you would accept that the new atheists, people like Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, have blamed a lot of history's wars on God and religion, and you make a similar suggestion in The God Delusion.
Yeah, I would blame a lot of history's wars, but the most terrible wars in history, the two major wars of the 20th century, are nothing to do with religion.
You accept that point?
Yeah, of course.
And the Cold War and Vietnam?
Yes, I would, of course, yes.
So when you have a situation where some of the world's worst crimes were carried out not by believers, how then does that square with your idea that it's religion that causes good people to do bad things, it's religion that's driving violence, your original statement against religion at the start of this?
Dogmatic belief in something like religion or something like Marxism or something like Nazism, these are all, or indeed patriotism, I mean, my country, right or wrong, these are all pernicious beliefs which can drive people to do terrible things. And in the Second World War, Hitlerism was driven by racism, by a sort of sub-Wagnerian pagan religion which Hitler revived. Stalin's atrocities were motivated by a dogmatic belief in Marxism.
And atheism.
Stalin happened to be an atheist, but he was never motivated specifically.
The Soviet Union was not based on scientific rationalism, on the elimination of religion and God?
Stalin persecuted the church. Stalin persecuted just about everybody.
Are you saying that the Soviet Union, the leaders of the Soviet Union, were not driven by a hatred of religion? and a belief that science and human progress and materialism was the way forward?
They believed that materialism, science, human progress, those are kind of there was a Marxist slant on those words, and they were hideously misused.
Mao Zedong, when he invaded Tibet, told the Dalai Lama that religion is poison. The subtext to the late Christopher Hitchens' book was religion poisons everything. Can you blame people of religion for saying, hold on, we've heard these ideas before, that religion poisons everything and it leads in one direction?
It's an incidental fact that Mao Zedong and Stalin happened to be atheists. They
incidental,
were not
it wasn't core to communism.
I think it was not core to communism, no.
So when Karl Marx was talking about religion being the opiate of the masses, that was just a throwaway line?
Yeah, I mean, that was an out-of-context statement. I mean, what on earth do you think that's got to do with atheism? I don't know.
Let me put a statement in context to you. Albania, one of the world's worst dictatorships, tyrannies that we've seen in the last 100 years. Article 37 of Albania's communist constitution declared, quote, "The state recognizes no religion and supports atheistic propaganda in order to implant a scientific, materialistic world outlook in people."
What do you think you're saying? I mean, that's an appalling thing to say. Of course it is.
Why is that an appalling thing to say? What do you disagree with in that statement?
Why would I want to support atheistic propaganda? I support science and truth.
But you don't support spreading atheism.
I support spreading science and truth. If that happens to be atheism, I support it. I'm not going to start bullying people into being atheist. I'm not going to start trying to compel people to be atheists. That was what the Albanians were doing. It's nothing to do with what I want to do.
Of course, but you'd like to persuade them not to be believers and become atheists.
I'd like to raise consciousness in a gentle, civilized way, using argument, rational argument, from evidence.
In your book, you cite lots of evidence for the bad things religion's done. What I wonder is, if you were being fair, wouldn't you have also included some of the good things that religion's done?
My passion is for scientific truth. I don't much care about what's good and evil, actually. I care about what's true.
Education gives you a different way of looking at the world.
That's not the way that God works. The whole point of science is that it doesn't require faith, that it has evidence that backs up your beliefs.
How does science help those people in Kabira? How does science help?
Hang on. Wait a minute, over here. Carry on. Laurie's over here.
Science doesn't need faith. The whole... How? In what way does science need faith? No, but I don't have faith.
It needs a leap of faith. What happened 1 second before the Big Bang?
I don't know, but that
absolutely. So you're exercising faith. Be honest.
Can I finish? Right.
Absolutely.
The fact that I don't know what happened a second before the Big Bang doesn't, assuming you can even consider a second before the Big Bang, assuming time existed, doesn't mean that science never will know that.
Didn't say that. So that means that you are exercising faith.
No, it means that I'm working on the basis of the best available evidence.
You are exercising faith. Be honest. Christians used to teach. Can I just make this point?
Wait. This is very difficult to follow. But the fact is that religion used to claim to explain everything, but it explains the Big Bang is a good one. Though.
It is, because in the 50s, Christians used to say that the universe had a beginning. Science used to say the universe didn't have a beginning, it always existed.
Some scientists.
Absolutely.
Scientists is not one.
Science has moved.
So if
scientists, you need to exercise faith.
No. If science was still peddling that principle, that the universe had always existed, because that's what we believe, then absolutely we would be no better than religion. But science has looked at the evidence and moved on. Yeah. Faith doesn't do that. Religion doesn't do that.
So what happened? I go back to my question. You are still exercising, but you are still exercising faith.
Wait, thank you. Religion. Why is it that in the countries of the world which have most educated people, is there most atheism? Why is that?
I just people find new gods, don't they? People find new, like whether it be celebrity or whether it be money, and then you come back, and then some of those people find celebrity, find money, and find actually.
If you taught in science that there are one group of people who believe the Earth is round, and there is another group of people who believe the Earth is flat, you automatically bring in this assumption that the two propositions are a 50-50 proposition. And by teaching all these different ideas of the world, that evolution might be true, that religion might be true, that isn't the case. And it frustrates me that it's being taught as different kinds of truth.
Sorry?
What is the point of religion?
What is the point of religion?
If you can take these these great parts of the Bible which say, love your neighbour, do good to those who persecute you, etc. That's brilliant. What you don't need is the things that say, burn witches, stone adulterers. And if you can cherry pick that...
It's very easy for people outside faith to look in and accuse people and say, you know, you're cherry-picking this, that and the other.
Laurie, what do you think about giving a child that you have the religion that you want to give that child?
I think it's quite naive to say that that there aren't people with very, very strong faith who do horrible, horrible things and believe horrible things because of their religion. Now, it doesn't mean that it actually says that in their texts, or that's what the texts mean, or what the correct interpretation is, or whatever. But there are people who, you know, bomb abortion clinics because they feel so strongly based on their faith that that's the right thing to do. I think that's highly polluting to many people's minds, and certainly can be extremely damaging in children. I think parents have an absolute right to bring their children up in the manner they see fit, but you know, it becomes danger when, say, Jehovah's Witnesses restricting their children from having, you know, blood transplants because because they think that it's against God. I mean, that people die as a result of that.
But that's more, but for them, that is more important. That for them, I guess, the idea that they could die isn't the worst thing that could happen, because within that religious understanding, there are things that they find more important than you, who don't have a particular.
Right, and that's great for that's great for them. And as an individual, they have every right to die as a result of lack of medical treatment because of what they believe. But when their kids with you know, developing leukemia aren't getting the treatment they need because their parents believe things which are frankly insane, that's
I think there should be protection.
Faith schools are a good idea then. They give you that moral code.
No. Why would you need faith to give you a moral code? There's so much.
Where do you think most of the moral code comes from?
Human beings. From people.
Just human beings, we just kind of made it up.
If you take...
A lot of this country that you're living in was built on a very Christian foundation. A lot of it.
But the ancient Greeks had a moral code.
Yeah, they had a moral code, but it's all built on their...
That was long before Jesus.
But it's all built on faith, isn't it? It was all built on their faith and their gods. So it's all built on a higher ground, on a higher purpose. That's where it's all...
Any of the human rights legislations that have come in the last 50, 100 years, the legislation against homophobia, against sexism, you take any of those things, against slavery, how many of them came from the Bible? Religion is consistently opposed
a lot of
over
those,
the years.
A lot of those.
That our laws have come about.
But I think we also need to look at the fact that human rights legislation says that children need to have freedom of religion, and parents also need to have freedom to bring their children up in a religion if they choose to. Now, obviously, you have to balance that against
human
the
rights laws often compete against each other, don't they?
You know, you balance it against the right of the child to make their own decision to leave a religion if they want to.
For example, the process of evolution. And they say that deepens their faith because it is so amazing.
Yeah, completely. I think science, I'm not a scientist, but I find myself hearing these scientific developments in quantum physics, and as far as I do understand it, I stand in awe, and I think it's amazing and awesome, and I'm inspired in wonder. I don't have a kind of breakdown in my faith, because I'm not reading the Bible like as you say, like a manual or a textbook or a scientific... Excuse me.
It's pointless. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but, you know, if you get rid of the Bible and say that you have to follow evolution, then the whole basis of the Bible breaks down. The whole basis, the whole point of us being here, the whole concept of sin.
Your faith may break down if you don't believe in creationism, but it doesn't.
It's very disingenuous of Christians to
There are many people who read that, many scientists, and it has deepened. I know Christians deepened their faith because
faith
it's
in
such
what?
a
Because it means, if you believe in evolution, it means that the whole basis...
It's not a question of believing in evolution.
The Genesis story is not a science...
Laurie, when you hear phrases like that, believing in evolution, what do
what do you think?
I think it's lovely when people are able to, reconcile their beliefs, and they're welcome to them. The problem is that a lot of, as this man's demonstrating, a lot of religious people make scientific claims, make claims about the natural world, whether that's the virgin birth, whether it's the nature of the development of life on this earth. They're making claims which can be testable by science, are hypotheses which can be tested with evidence, and time again they've been demonstrated to be inaccurate, to not hold up to the best evidence we can get. Now, if you want to have faith in God and believe that there's some kind of spiritual force in the universe, that's fine, great. And I know plenty of scientists who have that kind of belief and believe in science. When you're making claims about the natural world that simply aren't true, then you're wrong.
Consider Christianity. The entire doctrine is predicated on the idea that the gospel account of the miracles of Jesus is true. This is why people believe Jesus was the Son of God, divine, etc. This textual claim is problematic because everyone acknowledges that the Gospels followed Jesus' ministry by decades, and there's no extra-biblical account of his miracles. But the truth is quite a bit worse than that. The truth is, even if we had multiple contemporaneous eyewitness accounts of the miracles of Jesus, this still would not provide sufficient basis to believe that these events actually occurred. Well, why not? Well, the problem is that first-hand reports of miracles are quite common, even in the 21st century. I have met literally hundreds at this point of Western-educated men and women who think that their favorite Hindu or Buddhist guru has magic powers. The powers ascribed to these gurus are every bit as outlandish as those ascribed to Jesus. I actually remain open to evidence of such powers, but the fact is that people who tell these stories desperately want to believe them. All, to my knowledge, lack the kind of corroborating evidence we should require before believing that nature's laws have been abrogated in this way. And people who believe these stories show an uncanny reluctance to look for non-miraculous causes. But it remains a fact that yogis and mystics are said to be walking on water and raising the dead and flying without the aid of technology, materializing objects, reading minds, foretelling the future, right now. In fact, all of these powers have been ascribed to Satya Sai Baba, the South Indian guru, by an uncountable number of eyewitnesses. He even claims to have been born of a virgin, which is not all that uncommon a claim in the history of religion. Or in history generally. Genghis Khan supposedly was born of a virgin, as was Alexander. Apparently, parthenogenesis doesn't guarantee that you're going to turn the other cheek. But Satya Sai Baba is not a fringe figure. He's not the David Koresh of Hinduism. His followers threw a birthday party for him recently, and 1 million people showed up. So there are vast numbers of people who believe he is a living God. You can even watch his miracles on YouTube. Prepare to be underwhelmed. I mean, it's true that he has an afro of sufficient diameter as to suggest a total detachment from the opinions of his fellow human beings, but I'm not sure this is reason enough to worship him. In any case, so consider, as though for the first time, the foundational claim of Christianity. The claim is this, that miracle stories of a sort that today surround a person like Satya Sai Baba become especially compelling when you set them in the pre-scientific religious context of the first century Roman Empire, decades after their supposed occurrence. We have Satya Sai Baba's miracle stories attested to by thousands upon thousands of living eyewitnesses, and they don't even merit an hour on the Discovery Channel. But you place a few miracle stories in some ancient books, and half the people on this earth think it a legitimate project to organize their lives around them. Does anyone else see a problem with that?
I just want to thank for all she's done will be the first person who speaks, and that's the president of the Secular Humanists of the Low Country, Amy Monsky. also happens to be the coordinator of the Secular Coalition for South Carolina. She started the first Camp Quest in South Carolina and has done many more things. After Amy says a few words, we'll have Elizabeth Cornwell, who's executive director of the Richard Dawkins Foundation, followed by Sean Faircloth, who gave that rousing introduction last night, and is also director of policy and strategy of the Richard Dawkins Foundation. And then we'll have some other guy say a few words without the word foundation. But first we'll have Amy Monsky.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Amy. All right, I'm going to have to hold this. So, welcome to the brunch with Richard Dawkins. It's great to see so many people here. It's been an exciting weekend. We have filled every place we've been this weekend, starting with Yo Burrito when we reserved just the back section. And for those of you that were there, you saw that we not only took the back section, we took the entire restaurant. After we filled Yo Burrito, then we filled the auditorium and 3 overflow rooms, and people were just everywhere. And today we're filling this ballroom. So as you can see, we are definitely not alone. So as Herb said, I'm the president of the Secular Humanists of the Low Country. We are the local community. We're no longer just a group, we're a community of atheists, humanists, free thinkers, agnostics, you name it. We've been around for almost 20 years now. So this is definitely not a new thing. This is not just a trend. This is the way it is. We do lots of things each month, lots of fun activities. Many of them are social. We do monthly speaker meetings. We are bringing Andy Thompson in this month. He'll be the speaker next Sunday. That's at 4 o'clock. If anybody that's not familiar with what we do, he'll be here at 4 o'clock at Gage Hall at 4 Archdale Street. He's going to talk about why we believe in gods. We also have a...
Not us.
You don't believe in a god? I think I might be in the wrong place. Okay, also we have a movie club, we have a book discussion group, we have happy hour, we started a trivia night each month. We do all kinds of fun things. We have a family group, a family support group, and we do a family activity each month. And we have stuff for parents throughout the month. In addition to the fun stuff we do, we definitely have a community service element to our group. Each month we have a volunteer activity where we go out to the community and show people that we are good without God, that we are good people, we live good lives, we are part of the community, and we give back. We have a charity of the quarter that we choose every 2 months. The one for this month is the Palmetto House, which is a homeless shelter for women and children in Somerville. And we are going to do, as part of the Somerville Cares Day of Service in May, on May 4th, we've adopted them and we'll be doing a community service project there where we're renovating their outside patio area. And this is important because not only are we helping them, we're participating in this day, the Somerville Cares Day of Service, where 20-some other organizations throughout the community are coming together as a community effort. So not only are we helping somebody, we're participating as part of the community. We are not just a group, we are part of the community, and we're showing people out in the community that we will no longer be marginalized, that we are part, and we are taking our seat with everybody else. Along the lines of showing everybody that we're not going to be marginalized anymore, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Flower Town Festival. For those that don't, the Flower Town Festival is a community event that is sponsored by the Somerville YMCA. It's one of the largest art fairs in the Southeast. It's in the top 20 events. There are 200 to 250,000 people that come. And most of the booths that are set up are artist booths. But they also have booths available for nonprofit organizations to come and share information about their organization. And at SHL, because we are part of the community, wanted to be a part of this as well. To let people know that we're here and to reach out to those of us who would like to know that they're not alone. They thought that they were, but we want to let them know that we're here. And our application was rejected. Without giving us a reason for that rejection at that point, we had only to rely on what I was told over the phone. Back in December when I had called to ask if it would be okay for us to participate, and I was told no, that they're a Christian organization. So fortunately, the American Humanist Association's Humanist Legal Center, the Appiani Humanist Legal Center, took our case, and they contacted the Flowertown Festival and told them that what they were doing was not okay. And they didn't want to listen at first, but after we filed and said, filed a complaint with the state and said that we intended to file court, I believe what it said was after deliberation and prayer, and oh yeah, talking to their legal team, they decided to let us in. So we are now going to be a part of that. And I'm very excited. April 5th through 7th, and we are going to need help staffing the tables, so please let us know after that. Not only do we need help staffing the tables for that, we need help from you to let us know what would you like to see. What would you like to see us do? What would you like to see us offer? So please, make a point to not just to be a part of the group and to take ownership. Because this group is what we make it. And this group, it can't be a group of just one. It's got to be a group of all of us, and we all have to participate. So let us know what you think. Let us know what you like. The final thing that I'd like to tell you about SHL is that the last thing that we've got planned for this year that I'm very excited about is we're going to do something for the National Day of Reason this year. That's on May 2nd, the first Thursday in May. And perhaps you recognize the first Thursday as May is also the National Day of Prayer. So what we're going to do to celebrate, we sat around and we thought about it, and we thought something really fun to do. We're going to have a free thought slam, kind of like a poetry slam, where we're going to go into a coffee house and have an open mic night, and everybody can come up and read their favorite free thought quote. So look for details on that, but that's in the works. So I guess I'd like to close by saying this group, for me personally, has been an amazing experience. And I love the entire free thought movement. And over the last 4 years, to see us grow, not just in this local community, but as a larger community, has been amazing. And looking at the future of the group, or the future of the movement, it's definitely with our youth. And I want to end by just telling you about Camp Quest, if you don't know about it already, that it's a summer camp for kids from humanist, atheist, etc. families. And because our movement is growing so much, I think that the Camp Quest is such a vital part of that for our youth, to give them the community that we here as adults, I know there are a few children in the room, but mostly this is a community of adults, that we need to provide this for our children so that we can pass it on and continue to grow. So Camp Quest is a traditional summer camp with a focus on humanist values and critical thinking, and where we teach kids not what to think, but how to think. And that is for Camp Quest, South Carolina. We have one in South Carolina. Our last summer was our first session, and this year will be July 21st through the 27th. So with that, I just want to thank you again for being here and being a part of this and letting me be a part of this as well. And I'd like to turn it over to the Executive Director of the Richard Dawkins Foundation, Elizabeth Cornwell.
Good morning. Charleston is just a beautiful city. It's the first time I've been here, and it's just lovely. I do want to pay special thanks to Sharon and Herb Silverman, who've been our hosts here. But also, Herb has been niggling me for the past, 8 months, knowing that Richard was going to be coming here, saying, can he come to Charleston? When can Richard come to Charleston? And it's not always easy to say yes because we don't, this Richard's schedule is pretty tight, but I'm so glad it finally worked out. So thank you, Herb, for being persistent. And I do want to acknowledge Richard Dawkins because his generosity with his time is tremendous. And he doesn't have to be here. He doesn't have to come to the U.S. as many times as I asked him to come to the U.S. And so I think we should all just be really grateful that Richard is as generous as he is, and it's always a pleasure working with him and looking for him. So thank you, Richard. I'm just going to tell you a few things about the Richard Dawkins Foundation here in the U.S. We just, in fact, Richard was just in Miami. He was visiting a professor there, and we did a rather large talk in the, Richard did in the basketball court, and we had well over 4,000 people attending that talk. It was a great crowd. And that same day, we also launched our Spanish language website, which is has the look and feel of our English language website. It's pretty much run by a group of people in Mexico City. So it does translate some of our articles into Spanish, but mostly what this group does is find articles that are pertinent to the Spanish language communities. Spain, South America, Central America, Mexico, as well as the United States and the Philippines. So it's a tremendous, it's been a tremendous effort by our web team in Colorado, and we do have some tremendous people working for the Richard Dawkins Foundation. We dedicate so much of our time and effort and funds to our website, and I hope all of you have visited that website. And it's just a pleasure working with these people, and the reach that we're getting already is pretty tremendous with over 1 million hits a month. But with the Spanish language website, we hope to extend our reach to areas that really, really do need to know that there's community out there. There's a very, very strong undercurrent of secularism in the Spanish-speaking communities. So please, if you get a chance, let people know. If you could tweet or put it on your Facebook or on your blog, we'd appreciate letting us know. We will be doing this type of thing with some other groups as well. We want to do one in Arabic. We're going to be doing one in French, and I think our next one that's going to roll out is in German. Not that there's like a huge problem in Germany, but they are interested. There is a lot of science and things, and there is a creeping religion throughout Europe. So we're looking for people who can actually sort of run the website. So it's not us, it's not people who are not within the community who are running the website. We want people in that community. We also hope to do one with African Americans, with gay and lesbians, with ex-Mormons, ex-Muslims, and so on. So we're growing that, and hopefully we will eventually reach every corner of the world. And your support has in letting other people know about this website really, really does help us. And the foundation is also involved, obviously, in bringing Richard around to different areas to speak. There will be a tour coming up in September and October for his new book, which is his autobiography. And that's a big part of what we do and we get Sean Faircloth out speaking, and I know that Andy Thompson, who is also one of our trustees, is going to be here next week, and I do encourage you to go see his talk. It's an excellent talk. His book is excellent, and Andy is a terrific person, and again, great to work with. And I'm sorry, he wanted to be here this weekend, but was unable because of work constraints. But the other things that the Richard Dawkins Foundation has been doing, things like providing childcare at conferences, so that people could bring their families. One of the things that has been a concern is how do we bring more women into the movement. And of course, one of those things, women tend to be the provider for childcare, so we try to offer childcare, and that seems to have gotten a good response. And for more things that we're doing, we have done things with non-believers giving aid in terms of raising money to help in disasters. We raised over $500,000 for Haiti, and have raised money since then for to helping others. But mostly it's trying to reach out and let people know that there is a community, that there are lots of people, and I think we really saw that last night, the fact that we had to turn people away. And I do want to mention that for anyone here who didn't get to see that, within the next 2 weeks we should have the videos up. And we also have, was anybody there for the taping with Richard and John Huddleston? Okay, so that's what I remember. So people were showing up so early. Richard interviewed John Huddleston, who is a professor of biblical studies at the University, or it's not University, College of Charleston. And we went to the auditorium earlier, and much to our surprise, there was already people showing up, and this was at 3:30. So we took advantage of it, and we had some people sit down in the front of the audience and conducted the interview on stage, and that will also be on our website very, very soon. And again, one of the things that we do and we pay for are to have these events filmed, put on our website for free so that people can download them. They can share them with their friends, they can send them off to others. We're about communicating. We're about trying to get as many people to understand how we feel as secularists, as atheists, not as much to convert people, but at least give them the opportunity to read about why we are atheists and secularists, and why, as a community, we need to form together. And that leads me to introducing our next speaker, which is Sean Faircloth, who is our Director of Strategy and Policy at the Richard Dawkins Foundation. So he's on our political arm of things and understands lobbying and understands politics. And of course, as you got to hear him last night, an incredible speaker and able to get people excited about what we do and building grassroots organizations. We can't do this alone. Richard Dawkins cannot make changes happen on his own. Nor can Herb, nor can Amy, nor can any single individual make things happen. It takes us organizing. And as I've said again and again, if the Christian right can do it, we can do it. I mean, we have to be smart about organizing. We have to be smart about running for things like school boards. We have to be smart about writing letters to the editor. We need to let people know that we are out there, as Amy said, and not just talking amongst ourselves. We need to stand up and really take back the traditional values, the real traditional values that this country was based on. So without further ado, may I welcome Sean Faircloth.
Thank you. You know you've got a good sized room when you can't get to the podium. And as usual, Dr. Cornwell, our executive director, was modest. You folks can hear me in the back okay? Okay. That she is really her brainchild. I mentioned last night about the A campaign. The website and all of its improvements are really her leadership that really got us there, the new Spanish language website. So we've made huge progress, and really it is largely to her credit, so let's give her a round of applause. I'm also very upset because Elizabeth and I were in the DC area and we've gone to trivia games together, but I'm upset that Amy actually has an organized trivia group. I'm deeply jealous of this area. I was speaking to a group in back and a woman back who was talking about morality and atheism and humanism, and the first thing that popped up in that discussion of morality was sex. And then I was talking to a group at the front. I was talking to a woman, Vera, who's African American, and she was talking about how there was a lot of good reasons why folks remain in African American churches that are very logical and reasonable. And I want to kind of connect those two things, if I can. First, with the the thought from the back of the room, isn't it interesting that a lot of times when we hear morality these days, the first thing it translates to is sex? Well, I just want to make a little suggestion, a little old-fashioned morality. Consenting adults. How about that? Here's another one. Number 2, I was a politician in Maine for 10 years. Here's a little bit of old-fashioned small-town morality. Mind your own business. How about that for some morality about sex? Because when I was a kid, my parents, they weren't politicians themselves, but they were involved in the political process. And at that time, they really admired, as they should have, giants who walked this earth. And 2 giants who walked this earth. One was 5'6", and his name was Martin Luther King. And another giant was 5'9", and his name was Robert Kennedy. And no 2 people ever had more death threats that they knew about, that they were told about from the FBI. They knew every day when they got up in front of huge crowds the risk that they were taking. Now, these were 2 religious men, but I want to tell you, when the ruling came down from the Supreme Court in 1962 that there won't be government-imposed, government-orchestrated prayers in public schools, what did Dr. Martin Luther King say? He said he agreed with the decision. In fact, Dr. King said he felt even more confirmed that he agreed with the decision when he found out that the racist governor of Alabama, George Wallace, was so much against the decision. He said, well, then I knew I was right. So that's where the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was coming from, and Robert Kennedy was coming from. And we have to recognize that there were very good things that came from the social movement in the black churches in this country, particularly in that era, and that there is common cause to be had with people who care about those values. And when Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy were walking on this earth and using that word morality, they were not talking about your naughty bits. They were talking about your children. They were talking about the future. And that's really what this is about. And I said to a few people at different tables that we're going to have a lot of fun, all of us in this room, in Iowa. Because that's the vacation spot of America. Let me tell you why we're all going to Iowa in 2015 and the beginning of 2016. You know, Jimmy Carter, back in the early 1970s, said he was going to become President of the United States. 0 people believed him. Nobody knew who he was. And he came up with a troop of people from Georgia, not from Iowa, who bust up to the state of Iowa and changed the history of how politics works in this country. I went to the Iowa caucus campaigns this most recent cycle. And it was amazing. I mean, I'm a little small town politician. When I saw the Romney event, I saw a huge crowd of people. You know who the huge crowd of people were at his event? Reporters from Japan, Madrid, New York, Los Angeles. There were hardly any actual supporters and people. I have a friend there in Iowa that I got to meet who went around the last cycle and talked about health care. And he was just him, by himself, with a t-shirt, talking about health care. And he kept showing up and showing up and showing up. And these reporters, think of the poor reporters. They're sitting there for the entire year leading up to the caucus. They're desperate for stories. And they wrote a story about one guy with a t-shirt talking about health care. How many here saw video of or went to the Reason Rally? Okay, that was a huge event. If we got half of those people, if we got the people in South Carolina coming for 1 week, and people from New York coming from another 2 weeks, and we parse it out over the course of 2015, leading up to the January 2016 caucus, with t-shirts that say, get religion out of government, define common cause, with those like in the African American churches and the liberal churches that say they're going to remove religion from government, then we have a social movement that can gain media attention like nothing else and really transform society. We need to do this together, and we need to do it, as Amy mentioned, because of the next generation. I want to mention, I think there's a young man here named Carter Dawkins Owens. Where is Carter? A little boy.
Little boys, and so his dad went out.
Oh, he did.
Mom's here.
But Carter Dawkins Owens is named after Professor Dawkins. And I am convinced, based on evidence, what is happening for us is historically transformational. When Dr. Cornwell mentioned about this crowd in the University of Miami, you have to see it to believe it. You have to see the people coming up and saying, you changed my life. But now we need to take that, because Richard Dawkins has been generous with his time. He could command huge speaking fees. Most people at his level do that. Oftentimes he doesn't. He shows up because he cares about this. We owe it to him. We owe it to this cause to make it count. And by making it count, I mean to say, yeah, it's 2013 now. I will show up and volunteer in Iowa in 2015, as will people from Washington State, Maine, Arizona, every single state of the union, to change this country, and we can do something transformational. Directly connected with that is leaders like Amy and others, like Herb Silverman, who have worked so long in this effort. Let's have regular, statewide, free thought conventions in every single state of the union by the year 2020. This is really important, because we need to build that farm team. We should not just rely upon a Richard Dawkins showing up to spark a big crowd. I mean, yesterday is an example. I believe that, Richard just got to know John Huddleston at this walk we were doing yesterday. We set up, and Elizabeth set up this interview with him, and that will go on YouTube. And this is someone that, if we have statewide conventions, is part of that team of people who are experts in an area, whether it's the scriptures, or whether it's church-state separation, or whether it's lawsuits on issues, so that we don't need to rely on some international star to make things happen. So these regular conventions build this community. The ACLU has chapters in every single state, the Maine Civil Liberties Union and the Arizona Civil Liberties Union. We're going to have that, free thought conventions in every single state of the union. And we are going to expose the injustices that have spread throughout this country because of religious bias. I think sometimes secular people shy away from that word morality. I think it's a really important word, and that word has been stolen from us. It has been stolen. Real morality is about justice, and it's about civil rights. And in my book, I write about 10 areas of law. The two you know about, discrimination against gay people and removing women's reproductive rights, are 2 of the 10. But I also write about terrible oppression of children that many people are not even aware of. And I'm not talking about social oppression, which is awful enough. I'm talking about laws with religious bias that hurt children in the United States of America, plus 7 more areas of law. We are going to expose that. Thanks to Dr. Cornwell and Richard Dawkins, we had a meeting with a young lawyer in Portland, Oregon, and she is creating sort of a crowdsourced database where we're going to expose the ministers for a documentary who live off something called the parsonage exemption, which many of you may never have heard of in the IRS code, but they live high on the hog on your dime, and whether you use Google Maps or whatever, I want you to email me at organize@richarddawkins.net, because I tell you, that's going to look really good on YouTube when we see the houses of these rich ministers contrasted with the children who are harmed by religious bias in American law. And that kind of effort, that exposure in popular culture through a documentary, our organizing to go to Iowa, our organizing free thought conventions, we can be the ones. We can be the ones who become the next great cause of social change in this country. I admired my parents because they got to be there and help with Bobby Kennedy's campaign and support the values of Dr. King. That's what we need to do. We need to be the grassroots leaders for this next generation. You have the leaders here with Herb and Amy, but most importantly, you. You are the leaders. So let's take advantage. Let's take advantage and make it count that we are lucky to have the incredible catalyst and the incredible voice and leader that is our next speaker, Professor Richard Dawkins.
I haven't come with a prepared speech, and I shall be brief. I was, of course, immensely encouraged by the huge crowd that turned out last night. I was immensely encouraged by the more than 4,000 crowd that turned out in Miami a couple of nights ago. Clearly, we are on the march, and you've heard from Elizabeth and Sean the kinds of things that are going on, and Amy and Herb. So I am very, very encouraged by that. I think it's as well, though, to mention some things that are rather discouraging. many, many times before and also on this particular trip to America, I meet young people, such as people here, who say that they are atheists, but that they are disowned by their parents or estranged from their parents, or their parents have thrown them out, or their parents are not inviting them to meals and things like that, because of what I could only call bigoted prejudice. I wonder whether we could have a show of hands of people who are in any way estranged from their parents or have difficulties with their parents because of their stand. And that looks like about half the room. And that, I think, is a shocking indictment of something, and I'm not quite sure what. I don't want to make the suggestion that these problems are purely American. In Britain we have somewhat different problems, and one of our problems is, I'm sorry to say, Islam, which I think is less of a problem here. Only this morning I had an email from Lawrence Krauss, who many of you may know, a great hero of the free-thinking and intellectual and scientific movement. Lawrence spoke at a debate against a Muslim spokesman in University College London last night. And I don't know whether you know, but University College London is a beacon of free thinking. It was the first university in England to be founded on purely secular lines, and the first university in England to admit women and men on equal terms. At University College London last night, when Lawrence turned up for this debate, he found, well actually he suspected in advance, because I warned him in advance, that the Muslim organisers were proposing to have the audience segregated by sex, with the women sitting at the back, shades of Rosa Parks. I warned Lawrence about this and encouraged him to cancel the event. He contacted the organisers and was told that it was fine, they were not going to have segregated audience. He turned up at the University College London and found that indeed they were segregated. The women were sitting at the back. There was a separate section for men and a separate section for couples. Were they asked for their marriage certificate? Lawrence immediately protested and was given permission to announce to the audience that anybody could sit wherever they like. 3 young men, whom Lawrence described as nice, gentle kids, got up and moved from the men's section to the women's section. They were then descended upon by security guards who threw them out on grounds that they were a threat. Threat to whom? Lawrence then packed his bag and said he was leaving, and Lawrence walked out. Good for Lawrence. Unfortunately, the organisers chased after him and persuaded him to come back, and said that they would allow the 3 young men to go back to their seats in the women's section. Lawrence, being a decent, polite man, agreed to go back. I'm actually sorry he did. I think he would have done better to have walked out and given this disgraceful event the publicity it deserves. I'm sorry to take your time. This is not an American issue, but it only just happened, and it'll be up on our website, richarddawkins.net, probably by now, but I'm not sure. I've just sent it on. Another anecdote, really, that I think is disturbing. When I was in Miami 2 or 3 days ago, I was told of a teacher in a Miami school who had taught evolution, and there was a complaint by one child who complained to her parents, and the children complained to the school. The school disciplined the teacher and forced the teacher to stop teaching evolution. And as I think I told you last night, the teacher was enterprising enough to import another teacher who was a professor at the University of Miami to teach evolution. This was a flagrant example of capitulating, caving in to religious interests, because we have all, and it's the same with the case at University College London, we've all been brainwashed however, whatever our own opinions, we've been brainwashed into treating religion with kid gloves, as though somehow it deserves special consideration. If you think about that incident in London last night, and imagine that instead of being segregated by sex, there had been a section for white people, a section for black people, and as in apartheid South Africa, a section for coloured people, as they called them. It would have been, London would have been on fire with indignation. But all we nice, decent, liberal people are so terrified of being thought anti-Islamic, Islamophobic, anti-religious, that we cave in, we capitulate. School head teachers capitulate to parents who complain about the religious interests of their little darlings being trampled on. To hell with religious interests. We have to... stand up for much more fundamental interests of decency and enlightenment. And that's what the people in this room are about. And I've been very inspired to meet people here, to see the many people who turned up last night and who turned up in Miami, the many people who turned up on our earlier trip a couple of weeks ago in Colorado, where we were Richard Dawkins Foundation was fighting against the Good News Club. How many people know about the Good News Club? The Good News Club, it seems, is running a special drive in Colorado at the moment. You know, their aim is to subvert children's education by going in immediately after the school bell has sounded, not into private premises where they could do so, but into school premises where they are able to to dupe the children into thinking that these are legitimate teachers, and so the children go home puzzled and confused because a teacher has told them that they're going to hell if they don't accept Jesus as their Lord and Saviour. Something. Of course, it's not a teacher. It's a member of the Good News Club, and owing to some kind of remarkable decision by the Supreme Court, they're able to do this. So we were in there trying to alert the parents and the citizens of Colorado to this menace. And we brought in Catherine Stewart, whose book, The Good News Club, I strongly recommend to you. And she made speeches in both Colorado Springs and Denver. Well, as I said, I think we're on the march, and I think we shouldn't underestimate the difficulties that lie before us, and the show of hands that we had of people here who've been estranged from their parents as a result of their simply thinking for themselves is an indication of the problems that we have. So we are moving, we're going in the right direction, but we have problems, and don't let's underestimate them. So thank you all for your staunchness in this fight. And of course I'd like to add my thanks to Herb and Sharon and all the others who've shown us such wonderful hospitality here. Thank you very much indeed.
I really appreciate the generosity that he's shown in terms of time and involvement in this movement. And as he said, Richard Dawkins is not going to be around forever. He's the closest we have to infallibility in our movement, but even Richard is not infallible, and he's Professor Emeritus, just like we have a Pope Emeritus, except nobody thinks Richard is infallible or will be able to carry on forever. So as people in the Dawkins Foundation have said, it's up to people here to carry on the good work that Richard Dawkins and others have started. And hopefully in 20 years or so, people will be honoring some of you at national conventions for the work that Richard Dawkins and his group have helped inspire you to do in the future. So thank you all.